This past weekend, there was a Fathom Events opportunity to watch Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy on the big screen again. With the first film on Friday, Spider-Man 2 on Saturday, although specifically it was the 2.1 Director's Cut edition, and finally Spider-Man 3 on Sunday. And big shocker, me being the film enthusiast that I am, I checked out all three. First up was Spider-Man, originally released in 2002. It was the first full-length theatrical Spidey adventure. I never had the chance to see it in theaters as a kid. I did get to watch it on DVD shortly after it came out in the theaters, which set me up to watch the rest of Sam Raimi's trilogy on the big screen when I was younger. As a kid, my foundation for Spider-Man knowledge originally was the PS1 Spider-Man game, still one of the best Spider-Man games ever made. And after that, I started watching Sam Raimi's trilogy. As mentioned before, I watched this film's re-release on Friday. In Spider-Man, Peter Parker is bitten by a genetically altered spider, which grants him spider-like powers, and he then learns that with great power comes great responsibility. This film just feels like the classic vibe of old-school Spidey stories brought to the big screen, even if not everything is a perfect translation here. It feels this way because of how beautifully the movie sets up everything that keeps you invested in Spider-Man's stories. The kid that gets bullied, the love interests, family relationships, the thrill of being a superhero, and of course, the new bad guy that enters the scene. It does all this without feeling like it's concerned with setting up 4 movies in the future, which is one of the beautiful things about superhero flicks from the early 2000s. Half the time, they weren't always great, but the ones that were knew how to focus on their own great story without sometimes having that burden of having to play into an entire cinematic universe. Origin stories can just be peak storytelling when done right, and this film handles everything about Spidey's origin beautifully. Almost. As this movie gave me a lot of my initial knowledge on Spider-Man when I was a kid, I was initially under the impression that organic webs was a power that all versions had. But it wasn't until a little later I learned that that wasn't the case. While I naturally became more swayed to the use of mechanical web shooters, the organic angle just works for the pacing of this movie and allows the movie to focus on the other beautiful aspects of Spidey's origin. The movie just gives you all the right stuff for Spidey's origin, and showing you his relationship with Aunt May, Uncle Ben of course, and his motivation for doing what he's doing. Tobey Maguire was just a great Peter Parker, and Spider-Man I would say too. He embodies Peter Parker perfectly. For a few years though, there was a knock on his Spider-Man for not being a constant wisecracker like some versions are known for. However, he cracks more jokes than some might want to give him credit for. In fact, I was shocked that they kept in this re-release version the husband joke he makes at Boneshaw, as 2 decades later, that joke wouldn't exactly be considered politically correct.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
Everyone else is great in their roles. Love Willem Dafoe's Norman Osborn, and his goblin persona and voice were excellent. The costume is not excellent though for a variety of reasons. However, the problem probably stems from the fact that it's just not possible to do that costume and have the actor being expressive, which is why No Way Home went the way it did with no mask. The movie is divided into 2 clear sections. The first half being the origins of how Peter became Spidey, and this is handled beautifully in basically every way. It just hits all the right beats to make you really feel something in the way you should.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
The second half of the film is Spidey's battle with the Green Goblin. Goblin is the most sinister and sadistic of Spidey's foes, and that comes across in this portrayal. The final struggle in that abandoned building really packs a punch, literally. As a kid, it was tough to see Spidey take that beating, and this whole sequence is still ultra effective years later. All the elements come together to create an excellent start to a superhero franchise. Not quite on that legendary level for me, but it is very close. It's basically a legendary film, without being legendary.
You do too much. You're not Superman, you know.
Next up was Spider-Man 2, specifically Spider-Man 2.1, which I watched the day after on Saturday night. Now, I was old enough, or young enough, depends on how you think about it, to have seen Spider-Man 2 when it came out in theaters in 2004. That was a goated summer that also featured Shrek 2, Prisoner of Azkaban, and of course Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 will forever hold the distinction for me being the first PG-13 movie I ever saw in the theaters. As a kid, there were scenes that my 9-year-old mind felt were pretty damn intense. That scene where Ock's arms kill all the doctors scared the shit out of me. But 2 decades later, even after having seen the film a bunch of times since then, my spidey senses were tingling big time when the opportunity came to watch the film on the big screen again with a packed audience. Especially when this was the first time the 2.1 director's cut was ever released theatrically. In Spider-Man 2, Peter Parker faces an external crisis when he begins to question continuing his duties as Spider-Man, just as a new supervillain enters the scene and threatens those he cares most about. Spider-Man 2 is one of those most cherished film moments where you get a sequel that properly builds on the first installment and just tells the perfect story. It's just that right circumstance and story elements that come together to create the perfect tale. Empire Strikes Back, The Dark Knight, Shrek 2. It's just filmmaking and storytelling that leaves you saying, holy shit, that was perfect. I'm pretty sure there's never been a superhero film that has this much level of emotional focus for the protagonist. This film is just all about the emotional and psychological struggle behind being Spider-Man has on Peter Parker, hence his external crisis. I don't think a story of this type will ever be done in modern superhero films, just because all modern super flicks have to worry about the obligations of world building and playing into a cinematic universe. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing or anything wrong with that, but you watch a film like this and the storytelling on focus just feels different from modern super flicks. And I would say for the better in terms of being a standalone movie. The story is just the best of why Spider-Man is the best superhero when his stories are done right. And that's because of how relatable he is. Financial struggles, relationship struggles, complex evolving relationships with his friends, and the best of how his responsibilities as Spider-Man interfere with his personal life. In the case of this story, how it really f***s up his relationship with MJ. For as sweet and charming as their back and forth were in the first film, the turbulence they face here and the type of dialogue they have just feel more real. The nature of the story here, with Peter eventually giving up his duties as Spidey, means that we go an extended amount of time without seeing the webhead during the second half or middle portion of this film. Now, I don't love this concept for a superhero story, as it's the hero who's the money shot that we came to see. I was not a fan when we went an extended amount of time with no Bruce Wayne as Batman in The Dark Knight Rises, or the shitty writing to have Tony Stark not as Iron Man during the middle of Iron Man 3. Where it works better here is that it's all playing into the character building for Peter and the emotional focus this movie has with its great scenes, like him revealing the truth about Uncle Ben's death to Aunt May, or him rescuing the little Asian girl from the burning building. And if it meant we get that raindrops keep falling on my head sequence, then this whole external crisis was worth it. So much of this movie is focused on that internal crisis and personal struggle that a lot of the time the story of Dr. Octopus can feel like a side story, as it's not really the main focus of the movie. But he was still a great villain. That hospital scene is just top notch. And I like the mental manipulation his arms were playing on him and that kind of snake-like physicality they had when they were preying on him. But he had a charisma to him that made him an entertaining foe, with a proper level of sympathy with how his character was set up. In terms of Spider-Man himself, I think the minor adjustments made to the Spider-Man suit, in the eye shape and suit coloring, just make the suit look like pure art on the big screen. It just looks great, even if it's not completely comic book accurate.
Yes, Mr. Spider-Man.
See ya.
Where things really improved over the first film was the action. The first film had solid action set pieces, but you can tell that Sam Raimi and the visual effects team were able to majorly improve on the things they learned from the first film, and truly bring the epic Spider-Man battles to life through the movements, fluidity, and how dynamic Spidey and Ock's fights are. You get to that first fight when they're going wrestling style on the side of the building, but that train sequence is still the creme de la creme of one-on-one superhero action. That choreography and the way the battle just flows and how it's set up are just beautiful. And the 2.1 edition gives you extra sequences with the building fight and the train fight. And with how good the action is here, that's not a bad thing. My only complaint with Spidey and Ock's fights is that it's really unrealistic for Doc Ock to just shake off the repeated punches he's taken to the face from Spidey. When Spidey has super strength and Ock is still human, that math just doesn't work out. Although maybe it can if you go with the logic that Spidey is pulling his punches and Ock's arms and harness give him increased durability. But don't let that minor thing take away from the epicness of this movie at its best. Because the movie emotionally was setting things up perfectly, I felt major hype when Peter became Spidey again and started battling Octopus, culminating in the emotion and power from various reveals at the end, with Peter's relationships with Mary Jane and Harry Osborn. That whole wrap-up scene with Peter and MJ was just beautiful. From the moment you see her running through the city with her wedding dress to the final conversation with Peter. For as much as a bitch as she was during points of this movie, the story and how the film played out really did redeem her in the third act. And that final swing and the shot of MJ looking on were just chef's kiss, topping off a movie where calling it legendary does not do it justice.
Let's see who's behind the mask.
The great thing about seeing the movie again with the crowd is just the laughs everyone is able to share with each other. For as emotionally deep as Spider-Man 2 is, it's still naturally a very funny movie. All the stuff with Mr. Dinklage is great. Of course, everything with J. Jonah Jameson is pure gold. J.K. Simmons is just a treasure in that role. And even lines and moments that, of course, everyone already knows, we're still always getting laughs from the audience, myself included. What was nice about seeing the film again with the crowd is how it gave additional insight to scenes and other moments. I had never even noticed this detail before, but that moment where MJ asked Peter to kiss her in the cafe and the camera zooms on to her wedding ring, everyone in the theater had that "oh my god, you slut" laugh, as that ring detail is something I had never noticed before. But that's the pleasures about seeing the movie as goated as Spider-Man 2 is with the crowd. I do think it's the best Spider-Man film ever done, and that's of course including all the MCU stuff, the Amazing films, and the Spider-Verse movies. For as awesome and fun in their own right as No Way Home or the Spider-Verse films can be, there's just a quality about Spider-Man 2 that cannot be touched. And then came the re-release of Spider-Man 3, which I watched on Sunday. It's a movie I saw in theaters when it came out with a packed crowd on its opening weekend in 2007, on a Saturday at like 2 p.m.-ish if I remember right. That was a kickoff of another monumental summer. It's a sequel though whose creative decisions have earned it quite the reputation. In Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man faces his greatest battle ever, as he deals with the simultaneous threat of the new Goblin, Sandman, and an alien symbiote. All this while his relationship with Mary Jane takes an unexpected turn for the worse. This movie's narrative is a real juggling act in terms of managing all of the villain storylines. I'm not saying anything no one hasn't said since 2007, but this is a movie that has too much going on. None of the villain stories have anything to do with each other, and the movie's only method for dealing with all of them is to have stories getting temporarily taken out, either because of stuff like Harry's amnesia or Sandman being temporarily washed away. Also, unfortunately, none of the villain storylines are all that good in the first place. The hook of the Sandman story being that he's the one responsible for Uncle Ben's death feels really emotionally misguided 2 films later that was still going into Uncle Ben stuff. Although the obvious clear reason this was done was for Peter to have a motivation to use the black suit, and the film to show off its rage abilities. Those visual effects for Sandman were amazing though, and somewhat made up for his iffy story. Unfortunately, the middle of this movie is just a mess. The lackluster storytelling and the movie jumping all over the place really did make me miss the narrative focus of Spider-Man 2. The thing is, I think the first half of the movie is very good. It just naturally follows what was done in the previous two movies, with showing those charming character interactions, humor, the action is great, and of course it's just great seeing the further progression of the story we've been following for the previous two films. Most of Peter's issues here stem from Mary Jane just being the shittiest girlfriend in the world. All she had to do was not be a total ass to Peter when he was trying to help her out after the bad critic review. Although Peter, of course, didn't do himself any favors with that kiss he had with Gwen Stacy. He should have listened to that little kid. But still, everything in the first half of the film is working pretty well. It's once the black suit storyline takes hold that you feel the movie just take a major step down. Most everyone knows this movie's history, and that's director Sam Raimi did not want to do the Venom storyline as he wasn't a big fan of the character, but he got forced by Sony into doing it. That's likely why that story just feels half-assed here and given minimal development along with Eddie Brock. I actually like Topher Grace as Eddie Brock, but he just needed more scenes and development. Which even as a kid I just felt, well, that feels rushed when he ultimately becomes Venom. But Sam Raimi can still direct the out of some action. All the action set pieces are great here, live up to the potential of Spider-Man. I like the personal touch of having Peter as just Peter and get involved in the action, and it made those fights he had with Harry feel more personal and effectively raw. I might not have loved all the story setups that led up to the climax, but I did enjoy how big and spectacle it felt. It felt like the grand finish to a 3-part story, even if this was not originally intended to be the end of the series, but in hindsight, it works. What I always appreciated about the use of Sandman and Venom here is that it's two villains that were physically a major challenge for Spider-Man. As a kid, seeing the initial struggle he had going up against the two before Harry showed up really did elevate the feeling of danger for me, and I still mostly feel that 2 decades later. Spider-Man 3 is misguided in a lot of ways in terms of creative decisions and story payoffs, but that doesn't mean it's unwatchable. You still get a lot of fun action and the charm of Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire's world of Spider-Man. In the context of the first two films, unfortunately, I can't say that it's legendary, excellent, or even that I liked it. So I gotta put it a step below and say that it's meh. But it's as rewatchable and fun that a meh level movie can be. Seeing this movie with a crowd though was just a great experience. Seemingly everyone in there had seen the movie before and just relished the opportunity to see it on the big screen with others. The fun is sharing all of those laughs with everyone. All of the movie's intentional and unintentional laughs. My highlight moments were those moments where Peter is getting in trouble with MJ, either by kissing Gwen as Spider-Man, or that dinner scene where Gwen shows up and everyone was just laughing at how Peter is unintentionally f***ing up. By the way, Bryce Dallas Howard as Gwen Stacy, fine as but that black suit emo stuff is just pure gold with the crowd. Everyone was just busting up laughing at the scene after Peter and Harry's conversation at the cafe about MJ, and then Peter is just in his room staring with that serious, constipated look on his face, and everyone in there was just dying of laughter. I'll never look at that scene the same way again. And it was, of course, definitely fun to see Peter's black suit street walk with the crowd all these years later. Despite the movie having a lot of flaws, I and seemingly everyone else just had a blast watching this on the big screen. And that's based on the reaction the film got at the end from the audience.
they love me.
There's just a charm and earnesty behind Sam Raimi's trilogy that I don't think will ever be replicated. A lot of that is based on the fact that it came before the pre-factory stamped cinematic universe products, and how it was the first cinematic Spider-Man ever done. After No Way Home and Sam Raimi directing Multiverse of Madness, it naturally renewed hopes of potentially seeing a Raimi-directed Spider-Man 4. It's still shocking this hasn't been announced, as it's essentially a license to print money, and that's based on the nostalgia from filmgoers from 20 years ago still in effect, based on how this very limited re-release was a top 10 film at the box office this past weekend. If Sony is really that hell-bent on having their own Spider-Verse universe of films, then yeah, I just don't understand why they don't just fast-track a Spider-Man 4 and tell Sam Raimi, do whatever the hell you want to do, because that's what people want to see. So that'll do it for this 3-part review of the Spider-Man Trilogy re-release. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.